The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast. Right. All right, so Jason Myles is the host of This Is Revolution. He is oh yeah, nice. Do that again. All right, and he is the lead of Bitter Lake. Is that right? I got the name of the yes. And you know, one of the coolest guys I know, which is a low bar, but nonetheless. Welcome, Jason, to Diet Soap. I'm glad to talk to you today. You just recently put out a video essay called "Same as It Ever Was" about the
based off of where's that title from?
A Talking Heads song.
Yes.
Yeah,
Talking Heads song.
Once in a Lifetime.
Yep.
Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Yeah.
I always have to have a musical title for these things, right?
Yeah. That's a good one. And I have to tell you at the outset, I'm jealous of your video essay prowess. It's good stuff, but also, you know, I've made lots of video essays, never been invited onto the Majority Report to talk about it afterwards. So you've got some marketing moxie there, and I'm envious of that. But today you're going to talk about it with me.
And can I say before you even get into your first question, when on the Majority Report, Sam Cedar said that I reminded him of Adam Curtis, and whose name did I bring up when he said that? I said I also am inspired by Doug Lane.
Oh, see, that was right. So what you should have said honestly was, I'm inspired by Doug Lane, who stole from Adam Curtis before I did. So
if Doug Lane put something out, it definitely inspires me. There's a few things that I don't know if Doug feels the same way, and I feel like the spirit of competition is totally fine to have. In this sense, right? I think it pushes us to be better. Right?
No, we got to be in dialogue with each other about this because we're both making art to express our politics, and then similar art, you know, video essays.
But they're so different, right? They're similar in a sense.
Well, you have a completely different style from mine, and yet I can see how we're both influenced by Adam Curtis and how we're both approaching the same topics. By coincidence, I feel like the last essay I did and the essay you just put out are in dialogue with each other.
Yes.
Even though they're not on the surface on the same topics at all exactly, but they are in dialogue with each other, and we get to that. But I wanted to just bring up. Let's summarize. Like, what is your video essay about? You tell me. I've just seen it, but I'll let you describe it.
Well, I was kind of excuse me. I don't want to say inspired to do it, but it's been something I've been working on probably for the last 6 months when it comes to conversations that Pascal, Teray Reed, Adolph Reed, and I have been having about this kind of second wave of Blaxploitation that happened in the 90s. And every time I was getting ready to do it, something else would kind of be a derivative of this conversation, and that would take precedent over it. So I finally got a chance to do it. I finally got to sit down and do this. And I took a lot of it from something that Pascal had said to me from our first conversation that we ever had on camera, which was Black power succeeded culturally where it failed politically. And that to me just echoed cinema. Right. And I went down a research rabbit hole. You and I actually don't just steal clips and have an idea. We actually both read something to base this on. So I started asking those guys, and they were a little less help than I thought they'd be for articles of any sort of like Marxist perspective on that era of blaxploitation. And there really wasn't much on that.
No, we're talking about the 70s, right? For blaxploitation.
The 70s? Yeah. But there were some interesting articles written in the mid 90s and early 2000s about the transformation from the black box office or blaxploitation to the black box office. Like, how do you take Malcolm X, who at one point in time was the most dangerous man in America, you know, in the eyes of the ruling class, to a way to sell T-shirts and baseball hats, you know, in just 30 years, and then kind of just destroy whatever real message he had about any sort of transformative politics. And it's all kind of bootstrapping nationalism in that Malcolm X movie that's like two hours and change long. And Spike Lee's whole project, you know, pretty much from jump has been a marketing project. You know, 40 Acres and a Mule sold merchandise that said 40 Acres and a Mule. And so that's kind of where I always felt like Black power was. And there was a moment once where like me and Pascal and Cedric Johnson and Teray, I was like, we were sharing these pictures that I would find of all these Black Panther T-shirts, and it was like 8 different companies making Black Panther T-shirts. And there's a quote in one of the papers I had about Angela Davis, and Angela Davis says she walked into a shopping mall, and a young lady was very excited to see her. And the young lady walked up to her and was like, oh, I know you. You're on a different world. And Angela Davis goes, no, it's not me. And the young lady looks at her again and goes, oh, you're just the chick with the afro. And Angela Davis was like, I guess that's how I'm remembered now, the chick with the afro.
Well, okay, so let's talk about the history that you lay out in your video, because I mean, what you're talking about now is sort of the kind of final conclusion of your video, which talks about the commodification of the Black experience overall, right? And but I found what you put together there really interesting, especially at the beginning with Oscar Williams, where he was talking about how Black actors are told Blacks can't make money in films, and how he explains what that's all about. And you use that clip to go into, I think, into an explanation of the old Hollywood studio system. But Oscar Williams talks about Black actors and how they've been barred from films on basis of, you know, that not being financially viable. And
it's not just Black actors too, right?
It's exactly. He says it's not just about racism. We should think about how Hollywood is about. Basically, he says, you know, they're trying to hold on to. There's like a family that runs Hollywood. They're trying to hold on to their power and exclude, you know, white screenwriters and women and all kinds of different people, actors who aren't part of their system.
Family.
And I thought about how this works is that, you know, when it comes to filmmaking, the whole industry is a rentier industry. It's about property, about owning the property and then having control over the distribution.
And that's that's how it kind of starts. We talk about really quickly. I get into deindustrialization with the Great Migration West. I kind of hit on the riots that were happening at the time and the Kerner Commission report. You know, let's get some more images of Black people on the screen. That's something that happens post these riots. That's when you start seeing more Black affairs shows on usually public access television. You also start to see Black news anchors. And also,
when was this again?
This was a Kerner Commission report, and I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was 68, 67, 68. And that's an interesting moment, because it's also, you start to see the birth of things like Soul Train. Not too long after that, the rise of figures like Clarence Avant, that definitely becomes a bit of a spokesperson for Black entertainment, if you will. A silent kingmaker that a documentary is made about him like 30, 40 years later. It's on Netflix, called The Black Godfather, if anyone's interested. And the studio system, when you talk about the means of production, not only did the studio system at one point in time, of course, produce the films, but they also would like buy out the theaters that showed the movies. So in 1948, when that antitrust lawsuit came down and took that monopoly away from the motion picture companies, that was kind of hard for them as television got better. Television at first was just the radio on TV. So as TVs became cheaper, the quality of television got better. These movie studios started to lose money producing these big budget films. So it got to the point in the mid 60s where it's either the Warner lot or the Paramount lot. I forget which one owned Wizard of Oz. It was even Fox. Can't remember. But they auctioned off the ruby slippers. They were auctioning off parts of the back lot of Paramount because there's so much overhead you have when you have a studio because you have these massive lots, right? How do you think who's the guy that didn't kill people but sent the people to kill the people?
Charlie Manson. Charles Manson.
I can't want to call him Howard Hessman. Charles Manson. Wrong.
Oh man, that's like Charles Manson is the Beatles of serial killers.
I couldn't think of his name, but yeah, I mean, how do you think he lives in an old movie studio lot, right? So they have to sell off a bunch of land, and the studio system is losing a lot of money. So the business model becomes you need niche films with a super small budget. And what happened to hit at around the same time, and an independent movie is really big at this point.
But these were these new studios, or were they made by the same studios that had come before?
These made Blaxploitation films?
Yeah, these little niche films, were they being made by
all studios? I mean, keep in mind, Easy Rider comes out around the same time, right? These are all independent films. So this is the era of the independent filmmaker,
right?
Because the major studios, they're hurting,
right?
They can't do what they did at one point in time,
and now the independents can get distribution, because the studios don't have a lock on it. So, because one of the things I was thinking about as I was watching your video essay was how the theory of the auteur, the director as the auteur that came out of France, arose right around before maybe these independent Black filmmakers came on the scene. And they thought of themselves as auteurs. They thought of themselves, these directors, as being the force behind the movies, shaping the movies. And I think it seemed to me from the clip I saw that there was even a sense that there was a politics to it. It wasn't just a matter of trying to make a buck off of Black anger or something like that, but it was really about the bringing the reality of life to the screen. The sensibility. I mean, that's what he said anyway. The sensibility. I mean, obviously it was not real, right? These are unreal films.
I'll tell you what I think. I think if you look at cinema, there's been Black cinema since there's been cinema.
Right.
We just don't talk about it. And sadly, in a lot of these documentaries that you watch or things that you read, you really have to kind of get into the weeds of maybe like cinema studies people to learn that there's been Black cinema forever. Of course, it was definitely segregated, but these movies existed. Black people won in these movies. They wouldn't have lost in them. They were made by Black people for Black people to watch, right? But when you talk about cinema and Black people, the conversation tends to start with Birth of a Nation, and then it jumps all the way to Hattie McDaniel. So it's like there's Birth of a Nation, and then there's just the constant portrayal of the subservient Negro. And there's of course there's truth to that. We can't.
In these big Hollywood movies you're talking about.
These are big Hollywood films, but there's also this other circuit of Black cinema that has existed. Sadly, not as popular.
Right.
It just doesn't get talked about like Blaxploitation.
A lot of those films are lost too, from the early 20th century. Yeah.
But here's what I found interesting. The NAACP was like at post World War II and FDR's administration, like we need to get positive images of Black people on screen. So that's when you start to see movies like Carmen, right?
Mm-hmm.
These post-World War II movies of kind of valiant Black men. And you start to see the rise, even in the early 60s, late 50s, of people like Sidney Poitier.
Mm-hmm.
So the studios are spending money on movies like To Sir with Love, where he literally wins an Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? But that's one segment of society.
Mm-hmm.
And Melvin Van Peebles seems to be a bit of a provocateur. And he wants to tell another story. And with a loan from Bill Cosby and some crazy fundraising, he raised about $500,000. Remember, it's harder to make a film back in 1971 than it is now. And he makes Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, which goes on to gross $15 million. Now, he sold a soundtrack with it first, with an up and coming band called Earth, Wind and Fire.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of showed the model of success. You have this music that needs a way to get out. We don't have MTV. Terrestrial radio is extremely segregated and hard to break into because there's a lot of payola that's still involved in radio at this moment. And you're able to get the movie out with the soundtrack. And this was a movie where Black people went back numerous times to go watch it. So the studio was like, we got it. What do we have on deck full of Black people in it? We got this Shaft movie with a white guy. Get him out of there. We'll get a Black guy in there. And I don't really say that in the video essay, but originally Shaft was a white guy.
Wow.
And they were like, nope. And get Gordon Parks in there to direct it.
Mm-hmm.
So they see the writing on the wall, but their movies are a little bit different. The bigger studio movies are more of what we call the super Negro movies. Where these guys are like James Bond characters or private eyes, sometimes even cops. And then you get more of the Sweetback model, which is kind of lumpen proletariat, probably you would refer to him as hero in this new era of that we're coming into of neoliberalism, right? So, and we're now looking at the Panther-esque characters, the Black nationalist-esque characters, even the Blacks Marxist-esque characters as failures. So if you watch any of these movies, there's always kind of almost buffoonish dudes with turtlenecks and dashikis that are like, we don't like what you're doing in the community. And then, the drug dealing dude's like, well, you failed the community. I'm going to fix it because I'm going to stick it to Whitey. And that becomes the narrative. So you actually start to see almost culturally a lot of cats that, had the dashiki, take that off for the bright coat, take the medallion off for the Coke spoon, and you enter into this new era where ghetto chic is cool because the narrative is, this is our story. This is the authentic Black story. And these other movies, that's their movie. Those are the NAACP movies. My dad's movie. I don't want to see Jim Brown and the Defiant Ones. I don't want to see asexual Sidney Poitier. I want to see, Fred Williamson just give wood to white chicks for an hour and a half.
What kind of wood? Like birch wood or oak wood? Or, oh, wait. Anyhow, sorry. Wait. So, all right. Going back just a step though, because I, my point about the new wave, I want to go back to because everything you said actually really feeds into this, but especially because what you just told was the story of how these independent filmmakers got basically integrated into, or the idea that they had got integrated into the Hollywood system, and the Hollywood system was the big monopoly power. When it came to the culture industry. But
let me keep in mind, Melvin Van Peebles is kind of scorned by the system. He ends up having to sue a distributor And I don't even remember how much money he ended up making from Sweetback. And there's not a lot of Black producers and directors. There are some, but a lot of these movies are actually made by white people. But again, the audience is a quote unquote Black American audience that's going to see these in these inner city theaters. They're kind of left. Remember too, there's this migration to the suburbs, and the suburban people are watching TV because TV shows have gotten better produced. So these big urban theaters are filled now with Superfly and Shaft. They make another Shaft movie the next year. Made like 3 Shaft movies. Bam, bam, bam.
Well, I mean, it seems that Hollywood diversified and downsized sort of at the same time. You're talking about, like you're talking about going from major motion pictures aimed at a mass audience to niche films aimed at an urban audience in the theaters that still existed in the 70s, right? And sort of and so spending less and making less, but making more money per picture probably than you might have on a big budget picture.
They're back in the black, right? They're getting back in the black. And what really puts them over is the blockbuster in the 70s. If you look at the Blaxploitation era, some people say it goes to like 79, but and I don't even really want to get into it. That's more of a mixed era of kung fu movies. And there's a kung fu Blaxploitation that you get post 73, 74. But really, that era only lasts about 4 years before those movies stop making money. Because at about 1973, you start to get a heavy backlash from the NAACP, McCore, saying like, these aren't the images that we want to see on the screen. It's just pimps and hoes as like anti-heroes. And this isn't what we're about. And so that becomes kind of a fight. And I put a little clip of James Earl Jones having a discussion with Ron O'Neal about it. And Ron O'Neal, these were classically trained actors that couldn't get a break. And they weren't making that much money on these movies. And they thought, I'll play the whore, I'll play the hood. And then if I knock it out the park, I'm a proven commodity. I can get in the door. And what they failed to see was that there was so much negative light on them that Hollywood was like, well, first of all, actors are a dime a dozen. And we don't really want to deal with you because you come with baggage. Baggage that we don't want to deal with. Like Ron O'Neal came with a certain level of baggage. He's always going to be Superfly. I've watched Red Dawn too many times. Ron O'Neal is the Cuban general guy in Red Dawn.
Yeah.
Superfly.
Yeah.
So when I watch Red Dawn, I'm like, well, why is Superfly in Red Dawn?
Well, he needed the work. But
yeah, but you see what I'm saying though? It's like that was he hadn't had a big role like that in forever.
Well, I mean, this is what I want to get to. Is like, there's this moment of the director's auteur. It comes out of the fact that the studio system is broken up, right? It opens up a space for Black movies to be made in America for a Black audience because of the economic upset that's going on. So there's an opportunity there. And then the power of the monopoly power of Hollywood returns. And along with it, you have, let's call it the progressive left, trying to make demands on how people are represented on the screens. They're regulating a monopoly industry, right? They're regulating Hollywood. And I feel as though the notion of, like, I don't know, the old style entrepreneurial capitalism where everybody can compete in an open market and, all that is actually connected to this moment of the independent filmmaker, the director as artist, and the intervention about representation is sort of an admission of the return of the monopoly power in that industry. That's just that's something I thought of as I watched your video essay. I mean, perhaps the state would want to regulate a diverse set of entrepreneurial studios just as much, but it's a lot easier when you can dictate to a couple of huge studios what their standards are, and then they can dictate that to all the filmmakers and all the theaters and all of that. So, I mean, that just occurred to me that we're watching economics play out even as we're watching the cultural changes that come along with them. So, but one of the things that I think is, well, I'm just going to jump to something I thought at the end, and we can go back to some of the other questions. But I thought that one of the questions that comes up in your video essay is the question of how do Black people get represented on the screen? How do what's the responsibility of a progressive filmmaker? What's the responsibility of society to represent Black people properly so they can be integrated into society, or so they don't riot, or just so that it's a proper moral depiction? And it's just shifting back and forth between like a working class lumpen depiction of the reality of the difficulties of Black life, and as opposed to the depiction of the middle class, fully functional citizen in other films. And I just feel like there's an assumption about what popular culture is at work when we debate the Black character that way. And the assumption is that the whole of popular culture is about providing the public with attitudes. Like it's the popular culture is supposed to do our thinking for us. And it's like it's reducing art to propaganda. All right, so I wrote that down.
No. But this I was having this kind of similar discussion with Sam Cedar, where we were talking about Spike Lee, and you and I had a conversation about Spike Lee, and I can't remember if it was on air, if it was a personal conversation. I feel like it was a personal conversation.
It was.
I think it was about this before I wrote the script.
Yeah, right.
When you think of Spike Lee, and it's funny because you and Sam had the same reaction as She's Gotta Have It. You guys both like She's Gotta Have It, but you guys both enjoy Woody Allen films. Spike Lee, to me, wasn't trying to be the Black Woody Allen. He was just trying to tell his stories, and they kind of come out like Woody Allen stories, right? Spike Lee is a dude from upper middle class family from New York. He's actually part of a gentrifying crew in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. You know what I mean? But that never comes out in his movies. It's just movies where the cast is Black. And I don't think he was trying to be the voice of Black America when he started. Right? I think that was something that kind of happened to him. Had he been anything else, he just would have been a director. When we think of Woody Allen, I don't think he tells a definitive Jewish story.
No, although people try to push him in that direction. You know, there's certainly critics who talk about Woody Allen as a specifically Jewish director, but that's not how he's brought up. That's not how he's thought of in the popular culture.
No, not at all. Like
these days, he's only thought of one thing.
Now, you know, he's a bad word now, and I don't really want to dwell on Woody Allen. I'm actually not even the biggest fan. But my point is that in the 70s, these were quote unquote Black films that told the real story. And that was always the defense of these movies. Like, no, this is the real story. This is the real Black life that we need to get into. And then you have to look at to your point about popular culture, look at the shows that then followed. Good Times. But then you also have the Jeffersons, and because there really was upward mobility for a certain section of Black people, right? But there is a lot of shows about, you know, inner city strife, and that kind of becomes the story, and we always have to tell that story. And Spike Lee wanted to be antithetical to that story because he does not understand it. And if you look at his first two films, She's Gotta Have It, unlike Sweetback, where it had to get the approval of a Black audience for its success, before Spike Lee could even get distribution, he had to get approval from an all-white audience in San Francisco, or a majority white audience in San Francisco, before the distributors even signed on to distribute She's Gotta Have It.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't make the black rounds, if you will, which they're not as big as they are today as far as like black media, but he's kind of the darling of white media.
Mm-hmm.
And the clip that I cut of Spike Lee, and I had to watch a lot of 1986 interviews of Spike Lee, which was a horrible interview when he was a younger man, because he stayed away from race questions, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I put the clip in there where he goes, the guy, David Brenner, says, well, how'd you get a movie made for $175,000? He goes, well, I didn't have any union labor. Let's understand who this guy is. You know, he's a filmmaker and he's a marketer.
Right.
And these are his stories, but the media is like, this is the new black filmmaker, is Spike Lee, is Reginald Hudlin, and these are these new black tales. So Spike Lee hits with She's Gotta Have It, and then later does School Days, which is a story about a bunch of middle class dudes at a black university, and the one instance they have where they're meeting the poorer people, the working class people of the town, that's just that one scene. Those dudes go right back to school. And they start talking about divesting from South Africa. They kind of give a fuck about the people in the inner city. And I think that's how Spike Lee looks at that shit anyway, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's two main characters. There's the guy that's like a more nationalist dude. There's a dude that's a little bit more of a typical black bourgeoisie capitalist guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That famous scene. I'm from Motown. You want to see your ass back to Mother Africa. Like, and then after that, he does maybe his big breakout movie, which is Do the Right Thing, which, as a person that's literally from the inner city, I never understood.
It was filmed on Sesame Street.
Weren't me and you talking about this too?
Mm.
Yeah. It's colorful, but he made a conscious decision.
Mm-hmm.
And what's sad about this is that he capitulates to the critics. He makes a conscious decision to not show drug use in Do the Right Thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's supposed to be Bed-Stuy in the hood. I've been to Bed-Stuy in the hood. It didn't look like that. I won't get into that story.
But it was pretty, though. I think Do the Right Thing
is like big ass Oakland. I mean, these guys actually, I was unloading gear. I'll never forget this, Doug. I was unloading gear to play this venue in Bed-Stuy, and these black dudes ran over because we had California plates, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "You really from Cali?" I was like, "Yep." And they were like, "Oh, word, what are you doing here?" I was like, "I'm playing a show around the corner." They actually helped me load my gear, and these just black dudes from the neighborhood. They're like, "What you think of Bed-Stuy, son?" I was like, "She looks like a big ass Oakland to me," so I feel very comfortable. And we all giggled and they helped me into the venue. It was a cool little neighborhood, but it definitely didn't remind me of anything in Spike Lee's movie, because one of the characters was bugging out. His main concern is that there's no black people on the wall, and then there becomes like this more intellectual discussion when you start reading the reviews and papers about it, about how Sal didn't live in the neighborhood and they were gentrifying it and like all this such. And I'm like, that's great, but I've never walked into a Chinese restaurant where I'm from and been like, why the fuck ain't Martin Luther King on the wall? That was the last thing I thought. Right. I got real problems.
Right. Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? I had to dig Buddy out of the couch to be able to come here to eat so I could have a meal today. The last thing I give a shit about is who was on the wall. That seems like a very privileged complaint you have there, sir.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that assessment. But let's talk about She's Gotta Have It for a minute. I mean, look, okay, I'm going to ask this to go a different way. Spike Lee wanted to make Do the Right Thing. No one came to Spike Lee and said, Now you have to make movies about race, right?
True.
Did they? I mean, so this is what he ended up wanting to do, given the political climate.
It's also the climate of that era, right? We're talking about Steph Hawkins. They have the Tawana Brawley didn't lie at the end of that movie, so it's the climate.
Yeah, and so he feels like he has to, get involved to make his movies matter and make them political in order for them to matter. And I guess there's a politic to she's got to have it too. There is. It's just not. But it's not a black politics. It's a feminist politics.
For the main character, but there's also the kind of back and forth between Spike Lee's Mars Blackman character, which he ends up using as a way in with Nike, right?
Oh, right.
We forget he becomes kind of the spokesperson for hip hop, the hip hop culture. You put a nice hip hop spin on these basketball shoes there, Spike Lee. Is it the shoes? It's got to be the shoes. And Mars Blackman and the more Buppy character, the black yuppie character, who's more of a black conservative. Like, I thought that was a real funny back and forth. I wanted to actually put that in the video essay, but I was afraid, talking crap about Spike, I would get the
but the plot of that movie, the story of that movie has a feminist angle to it. It's not
very much so.
It's a critique of the men in her life and the empowerment of this woman that we walk away with that movie. And so I don't know, it's pretty conventional progressive politics on display for the politics. What makes that movie good is just the writing, the filmmaking, the sexuality of the picture. All that's fun and enjoyable. And I feel like has some art to it, that movie is worth coming back to. And maybe Do the Right Thing is too, for different reasons. But I guess what I want to ask is, how do you think about the art of filmmaking and especially in relationship to the way in which commerce and politics intrude upon the art and direct the art? I mean, this question of how are black people going to be represented on screen is an odd question.
It is an odd question because we don't ask it about too many other groups of people, right?
No.
And there really, for me personally, there is no, I've never seen, and maybe you have seen a movie that's like, that's Doug Lane's life right there, right? I get it. That's Doug Lane all day long. I got more from a movie like Moonlight because there's a lot of scenes in that when the kid's little that reminded me of my relationship with my mom, and a movie like Friday that reminded me more of my relationship with my neighborhood than a lot of the other more Moynihan-esque 90s movies where there was always the failure of these fatherless black kids, and that's what's wrong with the inner city. I don't like the fact that black film constantly has to be social commentary. Like, can you just have a film with black people in it living, doing shit that anyone else does? Like, that's okay. But this is, and Oscar Williams actually says this, and I don't remember if I put that clip in there from that documentary. The documentary is called Black Hollywood. It's from 1984, and every scene that Oscar Williams is in is clip worthy. But, he kind of makes a comment about there really is no unified black experience that you're going to say, well, this is it. Because there was a point in time where he was trying to make Let's Do It Again, which is a sequel from Uptown Saturday Night. And people told him, don't do it. It wasn't going to sell because black people don't watch comedy. Like, think about that for a second.
That's insane.
But that's what people that looked like him told him. And that's what the white people that had the money told him. That they don't watch comedy. They want to see hood shit because the numbers say they want to see hood shit. Yeah.
I have a friend who lives here now, Jim. My friend Jim was in the 80s. He was trying to break into Hollywood. And he wrote some scripts, and he was shopping his script around, and he had Hollywood producers say things like, audiences don't like snow in movies. You can't put. Maybe I'm stealing that from another movie, but they would tell him things like, we can't do movies in rural. We can't do movies about rural towns, little towns anymore. No one wants to go to. Everything has to be urban or things like that. And it was just a matter of like number crunching from last week.
Yeah, I mean, think about how if you look at the 70s, and let's kind of go back to that era that we're talking about. There was even the more gritty films were done in the city. The Godfather is in the city. It's in New York. It's dirty. It gets under your nails. Mean Streets. It's going to get under your nails. Taxi Driver. These movies get under your nails. And then you think about the Blaxploitation. That's all urban. It's dirty. By the time we get to the mid to late 70s, everything's happening in the 80s. Everything's happening in the suburbs. Poltergeist is a blockbuster. Suburbs. Or outer space. Alien. Star Wars. Because the model changes from small niche. We're going to get a bigger return on our investment. But now let's get a bigger investment and a massive return. So we need more wide-ranging films that are, what do you call it when you sit in the room and they ask you questions about brands?
Focus
grouped. And we're going to saturate every market, with these movies. And Close Encounters comes out. Jaws comes out. These are all mass marketed, super saturated. Again, Star Wars comes out.
Yeah, but like those movies, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Close Encounters, they're not. You don't go to see Close Encounters. You don't think you're going to go see Close Encounters because you say to yourself, I want to see a movie about people like me in the suburbs.
And you want escapism.
You want to see a movie about aliens, right? Yeah, something bigger than you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's escapism. Yeah. It's
some of the Blaxploitation, when you think about it, Doug. Nobody's a super pimp.
Right, of course not.
No super pimps, right? There's no super hookers that put razor blades in their hair and do backflips.
Well, there may be.
But you know what I mean? There's a bit of escapism in all this stuff. But now we're going to really mass market it to a wider audience. And even when you see the blow up of MTV, what's the first thing MTV says? We want to reach a wide audience, and anything that's not rock and roll is niche music. So we don't really want to have black music because that's going to cut off our audience in middle America.
How did rock and roll, this is another conversation we have to talk about sometime, but how did rock and roll stop being black music? That's insane. But it did. Yeah, well, Elvis, right, but
stop calling it race music.
Right.
I mean, we talk about marketing all the time, right? Once I call it something, grunge. What's the difference between grunge and hardcore punk? Nothing. Right. It's just a label, and now I can sell shirts with it.
But this idea that what we go to movies for, what we're looking for, and it's in the Hollywood people's heads, it's in filmmakers' heads to some degree, is a reflection of ourselves. That what we want is to find characters on the screen that will either be moral examples for us, or that we can find relatable. Relatable is a big word these days. You got to create relatable content.
Weird.
Or that we can, that will help us feel like our lives make sense, and that we can be, and that we are something. This I think has got to be thrown out the window. I feel as though really good films and books and music help you to think about and move beyond where you're at, to open up.
They can
possibilities. Yeah.
Sometimes it's just junk food. I like junk food.
Yeah. Okay. I like
don't go
junk
running
food.
every day because I eat well. I go running every day because I eat like crap. And I like junk food. As a young person, when I would stay with my father, my parents were separated. He would go, we get to go to the movie place and you can rent one movie. This is before Blockbuster, right? And every time I grab a movie, my dad would be like, no, that looks like it sucks. And then so I just had to watch what my dad wanted to see. Conan, Highlander, Platoon.
Well, this is the other thing. It's like the values I'm expressing, right? Oh, art should open you up. Art should challenge you. Art should make you think beyond who you are. All of that. Those are also like, I don't remember who wrote about this, but they say, these are like class-based values.
I just read someone said something about that the other day. I think we actually are mutual friends. Like me and you are mutual friends with this guy on Facebook. I actually had a critique about that. Sudeep. Sudeep actually posted something about that. I agree. I agree.
But why is it that middle class and upper class people want art that challenges them, that opens up possibilities, that makes them think, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And supposedly the masses want junk food. Why?
Do the middle and upper classes really just want art to make you think?
Those are the values they're supposed to. I mean, there's guilty pleasures, right? But they're guilty. But
again, the massive blockbusters
like what She's Gotta Have It is a film that's meant to make you challenge certain values, like normative values, and make you think. Not too deeply, but nonetheless, that's what makes it a kind of a progressive feminist film. Is it's an affront to
for its time, right?
Sexual mores of the time.
Well, there's different. Look, as the studios were making gobs of money in the 70s and early 80s from a lot of these blockbuster franchises, right? Jaws, Star Wars, Aliens, what else? What are we leaving out? Indiana Jones. As they're making gobs of money from these, now they can have tax write-offs in these art films. And that is kind of what you see with stuff like Spike Lee. You can take a chance on a guy like that because he's going to make an art film. Kiss of the Spider Woman. Think about some of the art films that come out of the 80s as well. Daughters of the Dust. There's a lot of foundation money that goes into this era of filmmaking that you're talking about, because so many cats that had money went to art school. So you kind of have these art school cats that want to make art school films. That's fine. They made them. Is John Waters art, or is John Waters junk food?
Yes.
Can he be both? Yeah. You said yes. Yeah. But does John Waters tell you the definitive story of the gay man?
Weirdly, yes. No. No. Yeah. So, but that's the thing about an art film, is that it doesn't. The other thing is it doesn't try to be definitive necessarily, because it's not there to say, okay, this is what is. This is how we should think. This is the film with the right ideas. It's more about. It's more open-ended. It's more of an exploration. I think this is how, this is what I get out of. But my favorite
film is just that. It's a genre of film. Like, what would you call Boots Riley's Sorry to Bother You?
I would call that a cult film. In the style of like Repo Man.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't know. I wonder what Boots would say. I
watched that movie the way I would watch kind of a low budget, thought-provoking, wild, somewhat flippant and ironical movie like Repo Man. Like heavily stylized and absurd, surreal.
Yeah, almost absurd.
Yeah, absurd.
But it's going to hit you over the top of the head with a message, right?
Right. Although Repo Man, what was the fucking message in that movie? But I'm not sure what the message in that movie was. Sorry to Bother You had more of a concrete message.
Yeah.
But that wasn't what I liked best about it. I mean, I did like that message. I thought it, of course, but I just loved the sensibility of that movie and the absurdity of that movie and it seemed like a throwback to me to a type of movie that in the 80s, like I would have.
Kentucky Fried Movie. I mean, that's what he would be comparing it to when he was talking about it. Because remember, I was living in the studio when he was shooting that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. And he would talk about Kentucky Fried Movie.
Yeah, it was crazy. There would be like weird scenes that didn't. You'd walk to the back lot and there's like people dancing.
The thing about that movie is it is hilarious. That's the thing about Sorry to Bother You, is how funny it is.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Repo Man is also not quite as, but still really funny. I think art films can be funny. Like I think important movies can be funny. You can have important comedies that are thought-provoking and open things up and make you think and all that kind of stuff, but they're hilarious. I'm not sure if that makes sense or not. That's my bias. It's my instinct. I like comedy so much. I'm gonna give it that. You can do that.
I mean, Boots is a different cat, right? He has an activist pedigree,
right?
It's in him. It's something he's done since he was a very young man. Before he was even doing music, he was doing.
But his movie doesn't even so much of it is a message. It still doesn't come off like an activist movie. It does. No, it doesn't come off. Look, not in a bad way anyway. A lot of activist movies, like they're heavy-handed without being self-consciously absurd. I think there's an artistry to that movie that makes it transcend its particular message in that moment. It's more than just a commentary on the sort of ham-fisted commentary on class. It's also the feeling of how crazy this disintegrating world is. And what it's like to work in a call center is there. I mean, because what it's like to work in a call center, I've done it lots of times, is a little bit like Through the Looking Glass, man. It's something very odd about it.
I was watching your video essay early this morning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking 3:00 this morning.
Hey, why don't we put this right here as the break, and we'll talk about my video essay now for a little while, and we can do that for the patrons. So This will be at 51 minutes and 45 seconds. Well, I'll say goodbye to you, Jason, and then I'll say hello to you again as we start the patron. But I'm not going to give you a new stream or anything. This is it.